Have you ever unlocked the front door to your own home, stepped inside, put your keys in the exact ceramic bowl where you always put them, and suddenly felt the overwhelming, completely irrational conviction that you've just broken into a stranger's house? You stand there in the entryway, the silence of the room settling around your shoulders like a heavy coat, and you look at your own furniture as if it belongs to someone you've never met. The couch, the television, the framed photographs on the wall, they're all factually yours. You have the receipts to prove it, but the psychological tether has been inexplicably severed. You look at the coat hanging on the rack and it feels like a costume left behind by an actor who just walked off the stage. You walk into the kitchen, you open the refrigerator. The hum of the compressor sounds like a machine speaking a language you've suddenly forgotten how to translate. You're standing in the precise center of your own carefully constructed existence. But you feel like an intruder. You feel like you're just house-sitting your own life, waiting for the real owner to come back and relieve you. Maybe you felt this too, that quiet, unsettling sense that the world is still functioning, the gears are still turning, the schedule is still intact, but the underlying vital meaning has started to leak out of the seams. You feel like a highly sophisticated replica of yourself, perfectly executing the daily routine, but devoid of the spark that used to make it all make sense. In a world full of noise, trust the signal. If you're hearing this, you've already found it. This is Dove and Serpent Radio. Stay with me. I'm sitting here in the studio, watching the slow rhythmic pulse of the amber transmitter tubes fighting against the absolute dark of the room. It's 2:17 a.m., the hour when the earth feels like it has temporarily stopped spinning, hovering in a state of suspended animation before the momentum of morning kicks back in. The city outside my window is a sprawling, silent graveyard of concrete and glass. Thousands of people locked in their own private dreamscapes, completely unaware of the invisible, heavy frequencies moving through the walls around them. It's an hour of extreme isolation, but also an hour of extreme clarity. The noise of the daylight world is a very effective anesthetic. It keeps you busy, it keeps you distracted, it keeps you from noticing the strange, hollow ache in your chest. But when the noise finally stops, when the algorithm goes quiet and emails stop chiming, the anesthetic wears off, and you're left alone in the dark with the uncomfortable realization that the person you're pretending to be during the day is requiring an impossible amount of energy to sustain. I was reading a fascinating journal of biological field studies recently, specifically looking at the metabolic extremes of the animal kingdom. There's a creature that exists on the absolute ragged edge of physiological possibility, the ruby-throated hummingbird. We look at them, right? We see these beautiful, shimmering, delicate little jewels hovering effortlessly in the garden, drinking nectar in the warm afternoon sun. But the biological mathematics of their existence is utterly terrifying. To sustain that hovering flight, to beat their wings 80 times a single second, their heart has to pump at an astonishing, violent rate of up to 1,200 beats per minute. They are burning energy so fast, living at such a hyper-accelerated frequency, that they are constantly, perpetually, hours away from starving to death. Their entire waking existence is a frantic, desperate knife edge of survival, masked as grace. But the most haunting part of that hummingbird's biology is what happens when the sun goes down. They cannot sustain that metabolic inferno through the cold hours of night. If they tried to sleep normally, they would burn through their remaining caloric reserves and die before dawn. So, they don't sleep. They shut down. They enter a state of deep, profound, biological suspension called torpor. They hang upside down from a branch. Their core body temperature plummets to near freezing. Their breath slows to a crawl, and their heart rate drops from 1,200 beats per minute down to 50. And now, to the untrained eye, a hummingbird in that state looks completely, absolutely, like undeniably dead. They're cold, they're stiff, you can pick them up, they won't move. They literally simulate their own death every single night, just to save enough energy to survive the sunrise. I think about that a lot when I talk to people who feel like completely and inexplicably drained by their own lives, you know? I don't know where you're listening from tonight. Maybe you're sitting on the edge of your bed, staring at the blue light of your phone screen, putting off the moment where you have to close your eyes. Maybe you're sitting in a parked car in an empty driveway, listening to the engine cool, desperately delaying the moment. You have to walk through the front door and resume the performance. But if you're still here, there's probably a reason. You're exhausted, but it's not the kind of exhaustion that sleep, can fix. You're exhausted because you've been living at a 1,200 beat per minute frequency. You're performing a version of yourself for your boss, your family, for your social media feed that requires an impossible, continuous burn of psychological energy. You're maintaining the illusion of the hovering jewel. And when the night finally comes, when you're alone in your room, you don't just go to sleep, you crash into a psychological torpor. You disassociate. You stare at the ceiling, right? Completely rigid, numb, shutting down your emotional core just to conserve enough sanity to wake up and do it all again tomorrow. You feel like an imposter because the thing you're projecting into the world is not a sustainable human identity. It's a metabolic crisis. You're listening to Dove and Serpent Radio, broadcasting into the deep space of the human mind. And speaking of deep space, I want to talk about the illusion of momentum. In the early 1970s, NASA launched 2 of the most ambitious space probes in human history, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11. And their mission was to travel further than anything we'd ever built, to fly past Jupiter and Saturn, and then to sail out into the uncharted, freezing void of the outer solar system, eventually leaving the sun's gravitational embrace entirely. They were incredible triumphs of engineering, hurtling through the vacuum of space at tens of thousands of miles per hour. For years, they performed flawlessly, sending back this breathtaking data. Their trajectory, a perfect mathematical arc drawn across the cosmos. But as they crossed the orbit of Uranus and moved toward the very edge of the solar system, something impossible began to happen. The tracking telemetry coming back to the giant dish antennas here on Earth showed a tiny, unexplained anomaly. The probes were slowing down. It was an incredibly subtle deceleration, a microscopic drag against their momentum. But, in the frictionless vacuum of space, it made absolutely no physical sense. Right? Astrophysics went into a quiet panic. Decades of calculations were questioned. Had we fundamentally misunderstood the laws of gravity? Was there a massive, invisible cloud of dark matter pulling them back? Was there an unknown planetary body exerting a hidden tidal force? The phenomenon became known as the Pioneer Anomaly. And for 30 years, it was one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern science. And it wasn't until the early 2000s, after sifting through decades of archived, decaying magnetic data tapes, that a team of scientists finally solved the riddle. It wasn't dark matter. It wasn't a flaw in our understanding of gravity. It was the probes themselves. You see, the Pioneer crafts were powered by radioisotope thermoelectric generators, chunks, really, of decaying plutonium that radiated intense heat to produce electricity. The scientists discovered that the heat emanating from these generators was bouncing off the back of the massive dish-shaped communication antenna. And in the absolute zero of deep space, the microscopic force of their own thermal radiation, the literal heat of their own engines, pushing against the back of their own antenna, was acting as an invisible brake. They were slowing themselves down. They were being held back by their own unvented heat. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. A machine traveling through the infinite void, millions of miles from anything solid, was slowly being dragged to a halt by the weight of its own internal fire. We do this. We do this to ourselves every single day. We wonder why we feel stuck, why reality feels like moving through thick syrup, why we cannot seem to reach the next phase of our lives. Despite all of our outward momentum, we think it's an external problem. We blame the economy. We blame our relationships. We blame the unfair gravity of the world. We look for the dark matter, but the truth is, we are carrying around a massive reservoir of unresolved, unvented thermal radiation. The grief we refused to process 10 years ago, the quiet resentments we swallowed instead of speaking, the sharp, heavy shame of our secret failures. All of that is heat. It is a dense, vibrating energy trapped inside the architecture of your own mind. And it's constantly pushing back against your own momentum. You're being slowed down by the ghosts of your own history. And how do we usually deal with those ghosts? We try to confuse them. We try to outbuild them. You know, there's a famous sprawling mansion in San Jose, California, where I'm from. Yeah, it's known as the Winchester Mystery House. And it was built by Sarah Winchester, the widow of the heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Okay. After the sudden tragic deaths of her husband and infant child, she consulted a spiritualist medium who told her a terrifying story. The medium claimed that her family was cursed, haunted by the vengeful, angry spirits of every single person who had ever been killed by a Winchester rifle. The only way to survive, the medium said, was to move west, build a house, and never, ever stop building it. If the hammer stopped, the ghosts would find her. So, she bought an unfinished farmhouse, hired crews of carpenters to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 38 continuous years. But she didn't build a normal house, no. She built a labyrinth. She believed that if the architecture was confusing enough, the spirits would get lost, and they'd be unable to track her down. The house is just a masterpiece of paranoid geometry. There are staircases that lead abruptly into solid ceilings. There are doors on the second floor that open to a sheer drop into the garden below. There are cabinets that open into other rooms, windows built into the floor. It is a physical manifestation of a mind desperately trying to outrun its own haunting. And we look at the Winchester house as a bizarre historical oddity. You know, the tragic obsession of a grieving mind. But to the magic makers listening to this broadcast tonight, we know the uncomfortable truth. We build Winchester houses in our own lives every single day. We don't use wood and nails. We use time and attention. When the anxiety creeps in, when the phantom ache of the life we aren't living starts to throb in the dark, what do? Oh, we start building staircases to nowhere. We manufacture frantic, pointless, busy work. We scroll endlessly through infinite feeds of digital noise, opening cabinets that lead to nothing. We fill our calendars with obligations we resent. We build elaborate, exhausting routines designed solely to exhaust us, hoping that if we just keep the hammer swinging, if we just stay moving fast enough, the quiet, terrifying questions about our own existence will not be able to find us. We draw trap streets in our own schedules. We are terrified of the silence because the silence is the only place the ghost can finally speak. But you cannot outbuild a ghost, because the ghost is just a displaced part of yourself. You're listening to Dove and Serpent Radio, wandering through the strange, overlapping frequencies of the night. I want to talk about the sound of true isolation. Now, in the late 1980s, the United States Navy was using a massive, classified network of underwater hydrophones. Okay, the SOS-US array. Designed originally to track the faint acoustic signatures of like Soviet nuclear subs creeping through the ocean trenches. But while listening to the cold, crushing sea, the acoustic engineers kept picking up this anomaly. It was a whale song, right? Undeniable in its structure and cadence, but the pitch was completely wrong. Now, most baleen whales, like the blue whale or the fin whale, communicate at a very low, like rumbling frequency, somewhere between 10 and 40 hertz. And it's this deep, like baritone, vibration that can travel for hundreds or even thousands of miles, right, through the water column. But this mysterious signal was singing at exactly 52 hertz. It's a pitch slightly higher than the lowest note on a tuba. Now, to a normal whale, a 52 hertz song is either completely inaudible or it sounds like some alien, incomprehensible noise. Yeah. Marine biologists have tracked this single, solitary whale for decades as it wanders the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean. They call it the 52 hertz whale, the loneliest creature on Earth. Year after year, season after season, it swims the migration routes, calling out into the freezing abyss, singing its complex, beautiful, entirely unique song. And year after year, the ocean returns absolutely nothing but the echo of its own voice. It has never received a response. It's speaking the right language, but it's trapped on a dial that no one else in the ocean knows how to tune into. I wonder if that's why you clicked on this broadcast, because you know exactly what it feels like to be the 52 hertz whale. You go to the parties, you sit at the family dinners, you participate in the endless, shallow slipstream of modern communication. And you are speaking, right? You are moving your mouth, making the appropriate sounds. But you realize with a cold, sinking dread that your frequency is completely misaligned with the people around you. They hear your words, but they do not hear your song. You are broadcasting an intricate, complex emotional reality, and you're met with blank stares, polite nods, and absolute, crushing silence. Makes you feel like an imposter. Makes you feel like reality is artificial because the feedback loop is broken, right? But you are not broken. You are not a glitch. You're just a 52 hertz signal swimming in a 15 hertz world. Now, in geology, there is a concept that perfectly describes this feeling of missing connection. It's called unconformity. And if you look at the sheer vertical rock walls of the Grand Canyon, right, you're looking at a physical timeline of Earth's history. These neatly stacked horizontal bands of colored sandstone and limestone. If you know how to read the stone, you'll notice something terrifying. There is a specific point where a layer of rock that is 500 million years old sits directly, abruptly, on top of a layer of rock that is 1.5 billion years old. And geologists call that the Great Unconformity. Exactly 1 billion years of physical history is simply missing. It vanishes in a millimeter of space. It's not that nothing happened during that billion years. Mountains rose, oceans shifted, life struggled and evolved. But the environmental conditions were wrong. Instead of sediment being carefully deposited and preserved, the land was exposed to violent erosion. The wind and the water scoured the earth, grinding away the record of an entire eon, wiping the planet's memory clean before the next layer could finally settle. And I think we have these great unconformities in our own minds. If you look back at your own timeline, at the strata of your memory, you'll find these massive, jagged gaps. Entire years of your 20s, or a long, hollow relationship, or a specific grinding job where the memory is just blank. You know you lived through it. You know you were breathing and paying rent and walking around, but there is no emotional residue. There is no preserved sediment. You were living in a state of erosion. You were performing a life instead of inhabiting it. And because the internal conditions were wrong, the memory refused to hold. You erased yourself in real time. And that's why you feel like you're waiting for something without knowing what. You're waiting for that erosion to stop. You're waiting for the sediment to start falling again. For the record of your life to finally feel permanent, to feel real. Feel like it belongs to you instead of a stranger. But to start recording again, to start feeling solid, you have to be willing to let the old version of the map burn. Biology understands the absolute necessity of destruction. We think of biological growth as a purely additive process, right? Cells dividing, multiplying, building upon each other. But one of the most crucial mechanisms of life is something called apoptosis, which translates literally to programmed cell death. When you're developing in the womb, your hands don't grow as 5 distinct, elegant fingers. They grow as solid, flat paddles of flesh, like a spade. The only way you get fingers, the only way your hands gain the definition and the dexterity, required to grasp the world, is through a massive, coordinated suicide of millions of cells. The cells in the spaces between where your fingers will be receive a chemical signal, and they willingly dismantle their own internal architecture. They dissolve. They die to create negative space. And without that highly specific programmed death, you would be born with webbed hands, unable to hold a tool or play an instrument, unable to properly interact with the physical environment. You literally sculpt your own physical form through this localized destruction. Now, we understand this physically, right? But I think we refuse to accept it psychologically. I think we're suffering right now because we are experiencing a failure of that emotional apoptosis. You're trying to hold on to every single version of yourself that ever existed. You want to keep the innocence of the person you were at 20, the protective cynicism of the person who got their heart broken at 25, the compliant mask of the employee you are at 30, and the idealized fictional version of the person you hope to become, like all at the exact same time. You're refusing to let the cells die. You're refusing to let the old identities dissolve into negative space. And the result is that you're walking through your life with webbed hands. You can't grasp the present moment. You can't hold a genuine connection because your grip is cluttered with the living corpses of your past decisions, your outdated defense mechanisms. You can't go back to normal because the normal you're trying to return to is a paddle. You have to let the spaces between the fingers go dark so the shape of who you actually are can finally emerge. And when you refuse to let the old signal fade, you become a digital ghost. Think about the architecture, right, of the screen that you're probably staring at right now. It's an LCD display, right? It's got millions of microscopic sub-pixels, tiny transistors that rapidly open and close, shifting between red, green, blue, millions of times a second to create the seamless, fluid illusion of a moving image, constantly updating, constantly receiving the new signal, completely surrendering their previous state to serve the current picture. But occasionally a transistor fails. It experiences a microscopic short circuit. It gets stuck. It receives the signal to change. It feels the current telling it to go black or turn blue, but it cannot respond. It locks into an open position, permanently burning bright, searing red or neon green, completely ignoring the movie that's playing all around it. It becomes a dead pixel, a tiny glowing rupture in the consensus reality of the screen. No matter what beautiful landscape or tragic scene is rendered around it, the dead pixel just screams its one frozen note into the void. I see people living their entire lives as dead pixels. They experienced a profound trauma in 1999, or they had a moment of golden, perfect glory in high school, or they suffered a heartbreak 5 years ago, and their internal transistor just fused shut. The movie of their life kept playing. The world around them aged. The scenery changed. New characters enter the frame, but they refused to update the signal. They're stuck on a frequency that no longer exists in the surrounding environment. Burning brightly and painfully, this jarring static anomaly in their own timeline. If reality feels slightly artificial to you right now, it's because you're tired of acting like a dead pixel. But you haven't yet found the courage to reboot the screen. The amber glow in the studio is casting long, strange shadows against the acoustic foam on the walls here. The silence of this hour is thick, heavy with the weight of all the people out there who are awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why the script they were handed feels like it was written for a stranger. If you take anything away from this transmission tonight, let it be this. The feeling of being an imposter is not a symptom of failure. It is the very first terrifying symptom of waking up. You can't feel like an imposter unless some deep, buried, authentic part of you has finally opened its eyes and recognized that you're wearing a costume. The anxiety you feel is the friction between the false bottom of your daily routine and the rising truth of your actual frequency. It is the heat of the pioneer probe pushing back against the dish. So do not run from the silence. Don't build another staircase to nowhere in the Winchester house of your schedule. Let the hammers stop. Let the ghosts wander the halls until they get bored and dissipate. It's okay to be the ruby-throated hummingbird in the dark, shutting down the frantic beating of your wings in order to survive the cold. And it's okay to be the 52 hertz whale, singing your strange, lonely song into the deep water, trusting that even if no one answers, the act of singing is what keeps the ocean alive. Let the great unconformity exist in your past. You don't have to explain the missing billion years to anyone. Let the old cells die. Carve out the negative space so you can finally grasp the weight of the morning when it arrives. The world is going to wake up soon. The machinery of the day is going to start grinding its gears, demanding your attention, demanding your performance, demanding that you tune your dial back to the standard, acceptable frequency. But you have this secret now. You have the knowledge of the dark. You know that the architecture of the unseen world is vast and strange and incredibly patient. So if things have felt strange lately, maybe the point is not to force them to feel normal again. Maybe the point is to notice what part of you is no longer willing to pretend that they do. Keep that signal close. You've been listening to Dove and Serpent Radio. And until next time, keep the dial somewhere between wonder and understanding.